Explain the Badlands. Explain those Badlands. That's a hell of a name.
All right, can I be heard right now? All right, can I get a comment from people listening? Yes, yes. Okay. All right. Blessed. Very happy. I have no idea what caused that very strange glitch. That was bizarre. And like I said, it would, or not that anybody heard me, but as I said under my breath, if the cord, yeah, it's a bad day not to have my spare wheel here. So anyway, we seem to be back on track. Sorry about that. Hopefully it doesn't happen again. What was I going to say? So yeah, while we wait for Gordon to arrive, there were a couple of points that I just wanted to run across today. Number one, there's a few issues that I know Americans don't always pay attention to European politics. Canadians don't pay attention to European politics, but it's useful sometimes. Considering right now there's been an announcement that von der Leyen's authoritarian plot, national democracies will be subordinate to her commission. So there's something that's worth keeping in mind. That was a new article post on Unheard, making a point that there is going to be a new what they call almost a coup of sorts, where the EU Commission, which is an illegal body in a sense, since the EU Commission, which was the outgrowth of the Maastricht Treaty of 1992, that got rid of or established the idea that a European Union would replace sovereign nation states, that had formerly been the standard modus operandi of Europe after World War, well, forever, since the days of Charlemagne. That was going to be replaced by a new higher commission that would be supranational. But up until now, it hasn't really had too much effect. And I called it illegal because it passed into law through something known as the Lisbon Treaty in 2007. And this Lisbon Treaty was actually, it needed to be unanimously adopted. And it wasn't. You actually had referenda in Ireland that said, no, we don't want this. And so they illegally forced a new referendum onto the people who didn't give the right answer. And then after a proper amount of threats and other things and terrorism from the bureaucrats at Brussels threatening to choke people off of their livelihoods, then the right answer was given in 2007, establishing the European Commission. This is what van der Leyen, whose father was a major player in supporting the growth of the Nazi Gladio operation in the 1970s, as he was the head of a certain province in Germany, and he staffed his entire government with unreconstructed Nazis. This is where she comes out of. And so now what's happening is that there is a program to basically staff as the Ministry of Defense, the foreign policy and security policy experts or ministers will all be staffed by former Eastern European anti-Russian warmongers who have a very different skewed view of history from Estonia, Lithuania, that she selected because they all are desperately frothing at the mouth for war with Russia. One of the things she's going to be doing, they say, if she's not stopped, and Hungary seems to be the only country which is actually trying to stop her, is to centralize the EU budget. So on the one hand, push for only conflict with Russia. On the other hand, try to centralize the EU budget to not allow for any of the countries of Europe to access their own tax revenues or other revenues as states, and instead be forced to beg to the EU Commission, which will allocate acceptable portions of funding. Now, what this actually represents, if you look at the EU Commission itself, the European Union, this thing grew out of a certain fascist by the name of Richard Coudenhove-Kalergi. Some people may have heard of his name, some people may not have. Kalergi is the father of Pan-Europe, the Pan-European Union in 1923. He's from he's actually a count, and he was a very high level, his entire family were high level players within the Habsburg Empire, the thing that was dissolved after World War I. And he was somebody who was pushing for the idea that we need fascism. We need a world government, but we can't get a world government because people are still in 1923 too attached to sovereign nation states. And so what we'll do is we'll create a stepping stone that will satisfy their nationalist proclivities, but it'll be a gateway towards world government. And he called it Pan-Europa. And he was brought in immediately by the Council on Foreign Relations into the United States. So he was always working and sponsored by Walter Lippmann, the various Oxford, Fabian Society, Rhodes Scholars, and that took over control of the U.S. State Department whenever he would come to the U.S. And he was working with people like Hjalmar Schacht, the finance minister of Germany, Hitler's Reichsminister, who became one of the leading members of Pan-Europa, as well as many leading Italian fascists around Mussolini. So that was the idea. And he even he designed the sign of what the flag for the United States of Europe was going to look like, which involved a blue background as well as a Templar cross so he had a Templar cross and a circular sun, which the Templar cross was going to be locked into, representing the son of Apollo. So if anybody's been listening to the previous presentations we've had here on Breaking History with Gordon, that's a bad sign. Now, this thing ended up getting a bunch of 12 stars around it, which were kept on the actual flag. The Apollo Templar reference was removed, but it's still implicitly there. And he's the father of the European Union. So that's what Ursula von der Leyen is representing. That's what she's stepping into. And who also is stepping into something here is Gordon, who I'm very glad you could meet us, Gordon. Thank you for making it on, dude.
Yeah. So I got a lot of stuff happening on the home front. Ended up last minute having to watch the kids today. So my dad was nice enough to come watch them during lunch. So unfortunately, I'm kind of short on time, so I might have to jump off here before we're ready to shut it down. But yeah. Anyway,
that's fine.
I digress. How are you today?
Well, better late than never. Good. We had a little bit of a technical glitch for about 3 minutes, but things have gotten back on track. My camera and mic broke down, but all's good now. So I was just going through a little bit of the development around what they call an upgrade at the European Commission, where von der Leyen is making a move right now to remove whatever dwindling sovereignty is still permitted to the European countries, with this new upgraded European Commission that's going to centralize control of finances, have more control and command over the military. And they're trying to build up a military too, with a bunch of anti-Russian Eastern European former prime ministers who are now staffed to be in charge of this thing. And only Hungary seems to be really resisting in any significant way, which is where Orban really called out this thing. And she's basically saying anybody who tries to bypass the sanctions that have been imposed on Russia will be punished. And as people know, Hungary has had an exemption because their entire economy would be destroyed. I think it's like 80% of their oil comes from Russia. So if that exemption is removed, then basically they said that they will seriously fight back, whatever that means. So Orban is courageous. He's taken a stand. That's good, but we don't see enough of that right now. So that's just what I was leading into, but there's a lot of other things we could definitely talk about as well. I know you've been pretty active on the Badlands briefs, which I always appreciate. So I don't know what's been on your mind, Gordon.
A lot of things, but I think that's a great topic to kind of start with, because I want to share this. I didn't get a chance to write about this in the brief yesterday for today's edition, but maybe I'll write about it tonight for tomorrow's edition. But this was an interesting article. German opposition leader suggests mobilizing private savings. So you'll recall that like the right wing party has won like in the German elections. So the I guess you'd call them the communists. I mean, it's so hard to know where within the multi-party system where all these different parties land and on the fake, false political, curated political spectrum. But this guy, Friedrich Merz, is the head of the Christian Democratic Union of Germany. And as a good Christian, as all good Christians would try to do, he's a communist apparently, because he wants to mobilize the private savings. I'll just read this real quick. Germany's most senior opposition MP has suggested, quote, mobilizing, unquote, private savings to fund public infrastructure. Friedrich Merz, the nominee for chancellor from the conservative CDU-CSU coalition, yeah, very conservative, of course, argued that such a measure would help Berlin avoid accruing more debt. Germany's Ministry for Economic Affairs last week released a forecast showing GDP declining by 0.2% in 2024, a sharp downgrade from the previously projected 0.3% expansion. This would mark the second straight year of recession in the EU's economic powerhouse. So just to kind of put this in perspective, Germany is the backbone of the European economy. They have been since at least World War II, since the idea of the European Union, especially the European Union is only 31 years old. But certainly, I would say let's just say since the EU, since, in post-war Europe after World War II was pretty devastated economically from an industrial standpoint. But basically, for the past 31 years, Germany has been the backbone of Europe. A lot of the other European states rely a lot on tourism, of all things, to especially places like Italy. But now Germany has been basically cutting off their nose to spite their face when it comes to this conflict with Russia. And they're basically prepared to destroy themselves in order to do it. So what they're saying here is that the previous projection was that they were going to get a GDP of 0.3%. And now they're downgrading that to a 0.1% GDP. That's how bad the situation is in Germany right now. And so, and they're saying, instead of shrinking the, instead of like making drastic changes to the budget and, changing the way the government operates in order to address this crisis, this self-created crisis, by the way, this was like an unforced error. They are saying, well, let's just start seizing people's private bank accounts and using their private bank accounts to pay for government infrastructure, public infrastructure.
On that note, there's something I was just noticing on the official Single Resolution Board for the EU. The Single Resolution Board is highly connected to the Bank of International Settlements. I think it's an outgrowth of it and the IMF, but especially the Bank of International Settlements, and the European Central Bank. And this was brought online as a bail-in tool. So the bail-ins are being tested right now, and they're basically saying that, okay, if we get another crisis like we had in 2008 or 2009, then instead of bailing them out, which was politically toxic, people don't like bailouts anymore. I mean, not a single banker went to jail, right? Nobody was punished, and they've just been printing money. Then they called it quantitative easing, which was just another name for free money to the banks, like maximum welfare state to the banks and nothing for the people. We're going to do bail-ins, which is touched on, I think, what you're saying. It's another variation to get to the same thing as an effect, which is let's steal the money. Let's take the depositors' accounts, and we will convert their accounts into proprietary holdings within the bank. So people will now be forced to be co-owners of the failed dead bank, which gambled with derivatives and unbounded speculation and lost. And so we won't have governments taking the burden, which is ironically just another way of saying, taxpayers. But now we're going to just basically have the depositors who voluntarily put their money in the bank anyway, who will now see that a conversion of their holdings, and then that will support the bank, recapitalize the banks, and then the people, will they get to say what the bank starts doing? Hells no. Right. I mean, if people actually got to have a say on the board of directorship of the bank and and told it what to do, yeah, okay, maybe, but no, of course not. So now they're gonna, with that new stolen revenue, and they've got something very similar in Canada. Justin Trudeau passed a bail-in law back in 2016. It was made full law. Like, this is part of the Bank Acts now. I don't know if this is in America, but I think it was part of the Dodd-Frank bill. There was, in 2010, there was a bail-in protocol that was inserted on like page 18,492 or something, which under a crisis condition could be activated. And again, they're going to put this towards what the priorities are of Europe. And if the priority is a death cult, they're going to put it towards Green New Deal projects that no private industry would ever voluntarily invest in, because it's such bad economics to invest in windmill farms and solar panel plants. And it's just, it's terrible investment. It's bad business. So nobody would do that unless they were forced to. So that's where I think that this is sort of,
and that's where you get, I mean, is it communism? Is it fascism? Is it corporatism? I mean, does it really matter? It's the authoritarianism. That's what it is ultimately. And all roads lead back to that. And that's why I think fascism and communism, that fake paradigm, is probably is going to become probably the definitive controlled opposition dynamic that people are going to become aware of, aside from the Republican Democrat fake paradigm, of course. But because, of course, both the right wing and the left wing of that stupid paradigm lead to authoritarianism, because they're both underlying the entire spectrum is about big government, expansive government, and the government getting more power to impose its will on the people, the private sector. And so what's really interesting about this, I mean, as far as I can tell, this is more of a discussion. This isn't something that's actually necessarily happening yet in Germany, although this is normally how these things start. They always start as talking points, and then eventually they're rolled out. And because Germany or Europe in general has such a weak democratic system, they have such a strong bureaucratic class, they're able to ham-fist this stuff through and just kind of force it upon people. And that's the defining failure of the EU, or the defining success, depending on what position you're taking on the EU. But that's what the EU is all about. The EU is all about undermining the sovereignty of the nation state and creating a continental government that a bureaucratic government that imposes itself completely on the individual and the nation state. And I love this development because I think this is going to be the destruction of the EU. Like everything that you were just describing, and then everything that we're talking about here. I think Russia, this fight against Russia, which is an existential fight at this point, there's no denying that this is an existential fight, not from necessarily a physical standpoint, meaning that like one population will be annihilated or the other one will, but a political standpoint where one political entity will be annihilated, the EU/NATO, or the Putin government will be annihilated. And it's looking more and more obvious. I mean, it's been obvious for a while that Putin's not going to lose this. So it's obviously going to be NATO and the EU that go the way of the dinosaur. But ultimately, I think the European people have to rise up and overthrow them. And we have to reach the point where the appetite for that, not necessarily the French Revolution, but though I do think that certain people are probably going to need to face dire, severe consequences, lawful consequences. But people are going to, I mean, like we've seen we've seen the protests in the street. We've seen France. We've seen the Netherlands. We've seen how people in Europe are very, very mobilized and very, very activated, even more so to an extent than we see here in America, where even though there's a very, very intense, active political movement or political movements, the general masses are not nearly as engaged as I think we are seeing over in Europe. And that's just because they are further down the road than we are.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I tend to agree with that. I mean, it's a little bit difficult and challenging to think about Europe sometimes, because the last real seriously nationalist fighter that I've identified in Europe was probably Charles de Gaulle, and that he was ousted in 1969. And he survived like 30 assassination attempts too. He's the guy who kicked out NATO from France. That was their headquarters, and they had to run away and go to Brussels. He had 30 assassination attempts. And this guy was a major league statesman who had a very solid intelligence agency that he was able to work with. He installed his people into security positions and was making major inroads with Russia, with China, basically calling for a different idea of Europe, but one that was based upon ending the Cold War, based upon large-scale infrastructure investments, things that involve real win-win cooperation, and doing it in a way that was based on what the oligarchy has been trying to stop, which is a recognition that through our labor, through the sweat of our brow, we achieve our moral identities. So by work, by labor, we can be fruitful and multiply, which is a very important concept, which was very, very firmly grounded within the Old Testament. That you can't just multiply, and you can't just be fruitful. You have to be fruitful and multiply. And if you multiply, which is a quantitative, purely numbers game, then you can only do that by being fruitful. Being fruitful is qualitative. So you have to make discoveries. You have to do things better with each generation. You have to challenge yourself. And that's what de Gaulle, if you look at his orientation towards political economy, it was all based upon developing the impossible. So putting government resources as much as possible into nuclear power. That's why France has 70% of their energy today comes from nuclear. And it's very difficult for the oligarchy to break France, even though they've done a pretty good job. But it's been much more difficult because they've had such energy sovereignty and cheap, abundant energy for industry, for the people, which, again, they've been trying to undermine. However, that's because of de Gaulle. Again, his approach towards wanting to recognize China as mainland, as a state, as the basis of trade with France, that was very important, as was his work with Russia and his work with Kennedy. So he is the guy who met with Kennedy early on, was advising him on how to understand and navigate through this den of vipers. And unfortunately, right before he could put out his new mandate, the social engineering of MK Ultra, the whole counterculture movement that drove a bunch of baby boomers crazy, with a lot of, with this new ethos that said, we're gonna have peace on earth by a big kumbaya fed with a lot of drugs, hallucinogenics, and sex. And somehow you just give into that, let go of, don't trust anyone over 30. That was big in Europe too. And that created this mob hive mind of young people who were useful stooges, who were induced to go to the streets of France and demand authoritarian big bad de Gaulle resign. And they did. It was sort of like a form of French Revolution. Except they didn't cut off heads this time. But de Gaulle was ousted by this CIA-directed weaponization of the mob's a la color revolution. And ever since then, we've had little bursts, little efforts now and again of leadership. We had Jacques Chirac, the president of France, or prime minister of 2001 and 2, say, no, we're not going to go and bomb Iraq. It's good that he did that, and the Americans got crazy and they said, okay, France is a traitor to freedom. We're going to not call them French fries. We're going to call them freedom fries. But there's been very little, and now and again you have maybe a figure like Herrhausen, a Deutsche Bank leader who was trying to bring a pro-industrial policy to develop Africa, and he got cut in half with a Gladio bomb that destroyed his limo in 1989. So yeah, Europe, I tend to agree with you. It's a challenging one. They've really abrogated their authority by allowing their nation states to become replaced by these supranational entities. But frankly, so have we. We've also abrogated our authorities here in North America too.
Yeah, it's a great point.
I see that. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. You're talking about in the lobby. I had this article which I thought was interesting. This is just from today, saying Putin can't get his way in Ukraine. NATO. This is the new NATO chief who was recently appointed. He's very, very good friends with Netanyahu. I kind of posited when it was just being discussed that he might become the next EU or the next NATO leader. I posited, I was like, I wonder if this is going to mean that NATO is going to get involved in the Middle East, which I do think is probably going to end up happening. Which, I mean, NATO, I think technically is already in Syria, so they're already there. It's just a matter of them getting involved with Israel directly in the Lebanon situation. But anyway, he's saying here, Putin can't get his way in Ukraine. We have to fight to the last man. We have to basically destroy ourselves. This is a suicide mission. We have to destroy ourselves in order to stop Putin, which is hilarious because it's the equivalent of basically jumping in a wood chipper and thinking that you're going to stomp it into submission. That's basically what they're doing here. So it's very encouraging to me, though, because these bureaucrats are so full of shit. And there's really no other way to describe it. They're so full of they've consumed their own bullshit for so long that I think some of them at least are completely delusional to the point where they actually think that there's a chance. I think the other part of it is that they have no choice. They have, like, if Putin seizes control of Ukraine and gets the control of those bioweapons labs, and the other things that are in Ukraine, the trafficking, all of the really nefarious stuff that's been happening in Ukraine for a while, which I think NATO had a direct hand in, um, the crimes that are going to be exposed would destroy NATO or destroy NATO and the EU anyway. So I think that's part of the reason why Ukraine is like the hill they're going to die on, is because that's the crime scene, and they're basically fighting for control of the crime scene, to a certain extent. So
yeah, I agree with that too. It's yeah, there's so many skeletons that are going to pour out of that closet. I mean, same thing too with Netanyahu, right? I mean, there's so many skeletons that are going to pour out of his closet if he loses and loses control. He knows he's going to be prosecuted on a variety of levels, from corruption to outright genocide, possibly. But many things have been building up behind the scenes. So yeah, I think that they're desperate, and the fact that Ruta came out saying this crazy stuff that Putin will that a new NATO headquarters for Ukraine will bring a change to the battlefield. How is that? Like, I don't understand if he really believes what he's saying, considering how many NATO associated mercenaries and operations have already been blown to smithereens. I don't know. But that's certainly, you're dealing with delusion. I think, like you said, they start repeating and saying certain tropes so often that they only talk to people who already think like them. They don't talk to people. They don't talk to their taxi drivers. They don't have taxi drivers. They have limo drivers. But they don't.
Who surely they don't speak to. I mean, I doubt they're picking the brain of any of the people, any of the help, so to speak, right?
Yeah, you don't talk to the help. You don't touch the help. You don't breathe their air if you avoid it. So it's a really cloistered culture of technocrats. And like you said, it's like, what is this? Is this communist? Is this like radical imperial capitalism, or what is this thing? And it's like, it's not. It's kind of like all but none. It's feudalistic technocracy. It's like the idea of a special class of people who see themselves almost as a superior alpha race, a different race than the other humans, who they actually intellectually see most humans as another sub-race to their alpha plus superior class. And purely through, I mean, on the one level, I think there's nestings, where these technocrats like Ruta or Mark Carney or what have you, they probably think in terms of people who believe all of the same axioms that I believe. So it's kind of like a religion. People within one religion will only talk with each other and not to people in another religion if it's a very rigid religious cult. So I see it like a religious cult. But then above that, you have I think the oligarchy, who they don't even understand. I think a lot of them kind of understand that there's a power above that demands expects certain behavior, and they've been trained to know what to say to give that behavior. A few of them might know of some of the actual power agencies, but I don't think most technocrats working in like the 99% of the technocrats working in Brussels, I don't think have a clue. They're so compartmentalized in their thinking that they just don't know how the world actually works. They're just doing their highly specialized little part within the machine, the way they were trained, and they can't think about a whole that they're part of. And then you have the oligarchy, which actually is laughing at these useful idiots to them, who are a lot more racially oriented. Like, in their mind, their spirit is tied to their blood, which is why they don't want to contaminate their bloodlines with lower order genetics. And this is where it gets very, very inbred. And that's where we start seeing we've got a very inter nested.
The Habsburg jawline, for example.
Yeah. Prolonged, or Prince Charles, now King Charles. Just that's what happens. That's what happens.
Yeah. Well, you're right. And I mean, remember, none of these people are critical thinkers. These bureaucrats, the drones that are working in the bureaucracy, they're not trained to be critical thinkers. They're all just, like you said, useful idiots who are trained to do their one task. They stay in their lane. There's an incentive structure in place that empowers them, or at least motivates them to do the thing and not question what they're doing and follow the order, and work towards, maybe they're true believers. Maybe they actually believe in the ideology that's being grafted onto all this. But ultimately, I think that they're going to do whatever they're told because they're, like you said, useful idiots. And then yes, there's an oligarchy above it all that is pulling the strings. That arguments can be made, and we've talked about this before, about how some of this stuff is orchestrated to a certain degree in order to destroy the thing that they despise. And I do think what they despise is Western civilization. I think that's a big thing. I think they despise humanity in general. They hate God. They hate God's creation. I think all of this goes back to the occult. It all goes back to Satanism. It all goes back to worshiping themselves instead of worshiping a creator, which is the essence of Satanism. But I think that that what it all goes back to, like the arguments that maybe this is all being orchestrated to destroy Europe, maybe this is all being orchestrated to destroy Israel. Those arguments, I think, are very profound, and I think that there's probably merit to them. The question is the plan to destroy those things happening like the way that they wanted it to happen? Because obviously, like the mass migration events, the overwhelming the welfare states across Europe, like that's all part of the plan for sure. The Kalergi plan, as some people know it, like the replacement plan. That's certainly part of the plan. But I think in the past few years, we have seen an acceleration, like the accelerationism of it all. The temperature has been turned up so quickly that the frog is now trying to jump out of the pot before he gets boiled alive. And that's when you see millions of people taking to the streets in France, protesting their government, demanding Macron resign. Like when you see those things happening, that's the frog trying to jump out of the pot. And then when you see Putin invade Ukraine, which I don't think they ever expected him to do, that's, or like to the extent that he's doing it right now, and the way that he's doing it, like the way that he's not being he's not doing what Netanyahu's doing in Gaza, where he's just carpet bombing cities and killing everybody in his path. He's being very surgical. He's being very precise. He's trying to preserve civilian life. He's preserving like as much civilian infrastructure as he can, because in his mind, he's like, these are places that we are either going to be managing after this, or we're going to be in partnership with. Like maybe there will be a Ukrainian state, although there are a lot of people saying now there's not going to be a Ukrainian state anymore. And it's just all going to become part of Russia and maybe chopped up and go to Poland and Hungary and other places. But, Putin is being very smart about this. And so this is what I wrote about today. This guy is fascinating. I've actually read about this guy a few times in the brief. Abdi Aladinov. I don't know if I'm saying his name right, but I'm just gonna call him Abdi. But he's the Major General of the Chechen Special Forces. There was a great video that came out that I put in the brief today that came out a few months ago, I think, where Putin went to the Chechen Special Forces are considered, as I understand it, like the premier of like some of the best soldiers in the Russian military. They're like the elite of the elite, and they operate out of Dagestan. And so Putin went to their facility in Dagestan, and he met with all the guys that were about to deploy, and he gave like a very stirring, like heartfelt speech to all of them, to rally the troops. And so I went and did the research on this guy, and this guy has a fascinating history, because we've seen this guy pop up a few times and give some speeches or give some interviews where he said, he's talked about the Azov battalion using women and children as shields, like physically, like holding civilians in front of them, as like human shields, like while they're fighting these guys. And he's just talking about how evil these people are, and like they have child trafficking farms, and they have all these different awful just crimes against humanity that they're obviously protecting. And he has said, like, we're basically fighting the devil. And so his history is fascinating. I'll run through it real quick. So Chechnya, there were two wars between Chechnya and Russia in the 90s. The first one was between 94 and 96. That was the first Chechen war. That was when the Chechen separatists fought Russia for independence. This guy was, I think, starting law school. He was he was in college, about to go to law school when that happened. And 20 of his closest relatives all died fighting for Chechnya, and that, including his father, who was a former Soviet officer, like a former officer from the Soviet army. His uncle, his brother, and all his other relatives die in that war. A second war breaks out in 1999. That lasts 10 years till 2009. Except in that war, you have the leader of Chechnya, the chief mufti of Chechnya, Kadyrov, I think is his name. He actually switches sides. So he joins Putin. So Putin comes into power and he joins Putin, and he's like, all right, like my guys are loyal to you. So you have Chechnya fighting Chechnya and Russia. So and
Right.
that war begins because Wahhabi Islam, like Wahhabi radical terrorists, snuck into Dagestan and blew up an apartment building that killed 300 Russians. I mean, just like analyzing that event, it reeked of Operation Gladio. And so basically, this guy is finishing law school. He becomes a prosecutor. He joins the organized crime unit. So his job is to prosecute organized crime. That the chief mufti, who I just described, is killed by an explosion during a parade. It's suspected that his own security was involved in that. So his son, who takes over, who's now the leader of Chechnya, the president of Chechnya, disbands the group, gathers up like the most loyal people that he can think of, including this guy, and he merges them with like the personal security force with Russian law enforcement, and creates kind of like this super organized, like anti-organized crime unit that becomes the Chechen special forces, as I understand it. So then Putin this is like 2004, 2006. And so Putin gives them armored vehicles. He gives them tanks. He gives them heavy equipment. He basically makes them like a legitimate military outfit, but remember, this guy's like a lawyer, like a prosecutor. And so this guy then leads 50 police officers out of Chechnya to Moscow, and in the streets of Moscow, they surround this Wahhabi radical Islamic terrorist who killed the father, who was part of the father's security force, and they just light him up with bullets, and they shoot him with so many bullets that the Russians were angry because they were like, you should have come to us and let us run that operation. You shouldn't have done it yourself. But they opened up a criminal investigation, tried to figure out who the killer was, and the guy was shot with so many bullets that they couldn't narrow down who in the 50 shot him. So they were like, all right, well, we just have to drop the case. But so this guy basically goes from there, from there goes on and becomes like a special operator, like leader in the Chechen special forces. And they fight in Ukraine back in 2014. They went to Aleppo in Syria back in 2017. The whole point was to like win the hearts and minds of the Muslims there, because remember, these guys are all Muslim. And then they go back to Ukraine. So now they're in Kursk, and you have, like we've talked about Kursk a few times, like the Blitzkrieg is happening here. And this is the Zero Hedge article talking about how Ukraine finally admits that Russia is basically crushing their offensive. This is from the Institute of the Study of War, which is a neocon NGO. And they like to produce these little pretty maps and try to, make it look like Ukraine is doing better than they really are. But even they're admitting here that Ukraine's getting crushed.
It doesn't look that great.
Yeah. And so what this guy, so what Apti is saying here in this article is that the elite of the Ukrainian special forces, who they sent to Kursk to spearhead this, those guys are now surrendering. They're now like the guys who are considered the most elite fighters in the Ukrainian army are willingly coming over to him and laying down their arms and saying, please don't kill us. Like we know this is a lost cause and we don't want to die. So you have the most elite fighters in the Ukrainian army willingly surrendering to, the elite forces in the Russian military. It's amazing. Oh yeah. These guys were, last thing, these guys were also sent to Rostov last year. Remember when Prigozhin and the like he did his March of Justice, where the Wagner group was going to march on Moscow and overthrow Putin? The guys who went and suppressed that, these guys. So anyway, assuming that actually happened. Like the Prigozhin thing feels like it's a total head fake, but that's at least the narrative.
I'm 100% convinced that it was a head fake. I don't believe that was I think that's theater. But absolutely no, it's a very, very fascinating history there. And I mean the way I think because Russia is, it is one of the most successful multicultural countries ever. I mean, as far as I could see, they really break the mold of what people think Russia is, because there's 89 ethnic groups in Russia. There's Christians. There's a Jewish oblast, right? It's in the east near Vladivostok. You've got tons of Muslims from Central Asia. There's so much history too, right? It makes sense. You listen to Putin's elaboration on the deep history of Russia for 1,000 years, and it makes sense. Like borders have shifted so much. Cultures have come through the Silk Road, through the steppes in the north. There's so much history. It's so wild, and the oligarchy wants to convince everybody that Russia is this Borg kind of like this authoritarian Borg state that can just have an authoritarian tyrannical command and control that doesn't care about freedom or democracy. That's why we're supposed to hate Russia. But you actually look at it on the ground. First of all, you look at videos, you talk to people who are in St. Petersburg, in Moscow, and it's like American culture in the 1980s in terms of just like generally healthy conversations. People are not all addicted to their phones. There is a phone addiction culture, don't get me wrong, but you actually have like integrated normal human beings. There's really not homelessness. Like you just don't see it. That like I don't see it anywhere. Just like
it's not in your face. It's not in your face the way it is. Yeah,
issue, but it's not nearly as much of a pandemic as it is here. And then they have
people are thin. People are thin. Like you don't like the videos of just like all the different cities of people just walking around. There's no like you don't see any fat people. Like it's all generally. Yeah. Which is because of all the crap they're putting in the foods over here in the West.
Yeah, which Russia has also put out.
Putin outlawed all that stuff.
Yeah, GMOs were banned in Russia I think there's only a couple of food products that are allowed to have GMOs, but for the most part, no. Same thing for China. I think there's like a short list of 8 products, like papayas, that are allowed to be GMO'd, but they've actually fought against these major multinationals, these Monsantos, to keep that crap out of their country. So they don't have that death cult. And then you see the effect where you got cultural groups that have been used by the CIA, as we've seen with the Chechens in the early 90s, as destabilizing influences against Russia, who, when they actually see that there is a leader that is animated by a concern, a real care for the people, you can get the type of transformation that you just elaborated on very efficiently, to the point that they're now the elite guard, defending the only point of survival for their society that they recognize, which is a cohesive, strong, healthy Russia with secured borders, which is what any country should want, is a cohesive, healthy, whole version of itself, of whatever country, with secure borders and a population that expects and holds their government officials accountable for being representatives or not of that responsibility to actually care about the people. So that's really quite something that's been able to happen. Now, I got a question on the other front right now. I know in China, you've got a lot of media on, well, there's 2 points in Asia, right? You've got an Asia, a NATO of the Pacific, which they're still pushing hard. I mean, the U.S. military industrial complex is pushing hard to sway the weakest link, Philippines, to be a member of this Quad, the NATO thing, which currently, it doesn't have too many members, but they do have a serious objective to stimulate separatism in Taiwan. So there's like a little thing that somebody sent me from Global Times, a Chinese news agency, just going through. It says here, on Monday, Chinese Coast Guard fleets conducted law enforcement patrols in the waters surrounding the Taiwan Islands, implementing patrol and control around the island. This is a practical action to manage the Taiwan Islands in accordance with the One China principle, says this Coast Guard spokesperson Yu Dijun in a statement. The Taiwanese are making a really big deal about it. I know a lot of American press agencies who are very anti-China are freaking out, saying, look, this is more evidence that China is out to do what Russia did to Ukraine and invade, they don't tend to talk about the fact that Taiwan is legally a part of China. It's an autonomous province of China. So how do you invade your own province? That's a weird one. But then at the same time, you have a lot of saber rattling there. I know there's upcoming Pacific NATO games as well, just like there's currently the NATO steadfast noon exercise happening right now on Russia's perimeter. You got another provocative NATO exercise being prepared on China's perimeter, and then you have North Korea that just had that's Kim Jong-un here with his military generals having an emergency meeting where they conclude that it's important for them to blow up the roads and rail systems from South Korea into North Korea. That's also happening as we speak. So what's your take on some of the hotspots that are being lit on fire a little bit, or at least the tension buildup in Asia?
Was that picture recent? Was that a new picture?
It was from a new article that was just announcing that.
Wow.
Yeah.
Very noteworthy very noteworthy how Kim is dressed right there, because he's wearing Western garb.
That's true.
To me, like I don't think that's insignificant. He didn't start dressing like that until after him and Trump like made amends, and then he lost a bunch of weight and he started dressing like that. And then after Biden came back is when he started going back to wearing the Hillary Clinton outfit. And I always point that out, but I don't think that's insignificant, because I do think that is representative of being controlled and then not controlled. But I view all this as like a chess match. Like in chess, like one player moves his pawn and then the other player slides his rook to block the pawn, right? So you have Netanyahu backed by the hegemony, posturing, invading Lebanon and posturing to go to war with Iran, right? What does Putin do? He signs a strategic partnership with Iran, and he immediately sends his prime minister down there and says, we have Iran's back, and we're basically going to be what America is to Israel. We're going to be that to Iran. And so like, we're the giant grizzly bears standing behind Iran. And if you want to come fight Iran, you're going to fight us too. Very clear about that. Now you have military exercises that are happening in the off the coast of South Korea between the U.S. Navy and South Korea. You have South Korea like posturing with their rhetoric that they want to fight North Korea, which is amazing because a few short years ago that we were talking about a potential unification between the two countries, back when Trump was in office. But that just goes to show what the CIA is doing. They started sending propaganda balloons into North Korea. Kim Jong-un sent poop balloons back. And then South Korea was like, we're going to respond with missiles now because of your poop balloons. And then the U.S. Navy comes over and they run joint drills. And so Russia, Putin, I wrote about this 2 days ago in the brief. Putin now comes in and does the exact same thing he did with Iran. He signs a strategic partnership, using the exact same rhetoric. He presented it to the Kremlin. He presented it to, I think it's the Duma, their Congress. And he says, yeah, we're gonna do the exact same thing. What the U.S. is to South Korea, we are going to be to North Korea. We're going to stand right behind North Korea. And if you mess with North Korea, you're messing with us and you're going to fight us. Same thing's happening in India, by the way. I don't know. Are you familiar with what's happening with India and China? Or not China, but India.
No, I don't. Brief me.
India and Canada, rather.
Oh, Canada. Well, I know Canada is attacking Modi for being behind the murder of a Khalistani separatist. I know that.
Yeah, these like Sikh separatists have been getting murdered in Canada, and I don't know anything about these guys. I know that the Sikh, generally speaking, like back when Trump was running in 2016, there were a lot of Sikh who came out in support of Trump, and they were like, and a lot of people didn't know a lot about the Sikh back then, but the Sikh seemed to be pretty based. Like they seem to have pretty generally speaking good views. Like positive views, not controlled by nefarious forces. But the Sikh, for those who don't know, are from the region of Kashmir, among other surrounding areas. Kashmir is the territory between Pakistan and India, highly contested for centuries between the Hindus and the Muslims. One of the most contested regions probably in the world for an extensive period. And so you have these Sikhs are being murdered. These separatists are being killed in Canada. The Canadian government, Trudeau, is blaming it on Modi. to the extent that they've expelled now the Indian diplomats from Canada, and they've said you are not allowed. You're like, we are ending diplomatic relations with India. India has now expelled Canadian diplomats from India, and I find it hilarious that last week Trump does this interview with this guy Andrew Schultz, who's, it's kind of like a very casual styled interview. And there's an Indian guy with him. It's like a group of guys all kind of talking to Trump in a very casual setting. And one of the guys is Indian. And so Schultz asks Trump about Modi. And then Trump, says a lot of really nice things about him, says he's like a father figure. And he's like, but you know what? He's the nicest guy you ever meet, but he's a total killer. Like, don't kid yourself. He's a total killer. And I wrote about in the brief, like I felt like that was signal, like that was Trump almost kind of signaling to certain people that he knew what they were up to, because I don't view Modi at all as like some ruthless killer. Although I'm sure he's a very, very capable politician. I mean, to be in power as long as he's been, I'm sure he's no pushover. But he also comes across to me as kind of this benevolent in terms of the Sovereign Alliance. He's kind of like the wise elder that a lot of people seem to respect. Yeah. He doesn't seem to be the guy who's like fomenting for war, demanding war. He seems to be the guy who's seeking peace. So the allegations that he's like some like hardcore killer and someone who's gonna, the stuff they've said about Putin for a long time, the kind of guy who's gonna send a hit squad to kill you in your sleep, doesn't strike me as that kind of guy. But that's the rhetoric that's out there now. Canada and Trudeau are accusing Modi of being that guy.
Yeah, that's right. And well, I think the thing about the Khalistani separatists is that they don't represent the Sikhs per se. Like most Sikhs that you will encounter do not approve of the Khalistani separatists, who were terrorists, are terrorists, and their headquarters up until 1984 was this Golden Temple in Amritsar, in just in that very area you were describing. And that's where Indira Gandhi, when she was prime minister, she unleashed a massive crackdown, because this was a center of Gladio in India. So a major they were moving a lot of drugs, a lot of illegal arms. And the British had a lot to do with this, because when the British were still controlling India, they promised a variety of their Sikh elite hanger-oners that we'll give you your own country. Just like we're going to give the Muslims Pakistan, we'll carve up a little bit of Khalistan for you too. And it was a historic, centuries ago, that was a little kingdom. So the British promised it. They inflamed it. They organized different cells, organized by their various, tantric, because I mean they calibrate their Masonic orders to various ethnic groups that they go into. So you'll have a more Arabic twist or flavor to the what E.G. Brown sets up, or Lawrence of Arabia operates through in the Middle East. They'll have like more of an Arabic twist that accommodates some of the language expected from a Muslim mindset, but that would still have an initiatory set of degrees that ultimately brings you to, I guess, Satan at the top. And they'll do the same thing for India. They'll have a little bit more of a language that accommodates the Hindu mindset, or in the case of the Sikhs, the Sikh mindset, and do the same thing. And so you had a Gladio terrorist organization, very operational. Don't forget that the Nazis in India had a weird connection. Hitler was obsessed with the Atlantean origins of this Indo-Hyperborean civilization, which Hitler had a whole ministry built up around doing that and tracking down the ancient origins of the Aryans, who he saw as like the feeder for the new sixth root race that would evolve and crush all of the inferior races on the earth, of which he saw the strange Indo-European connection there. So you had a lot of Indians who were pro-Nazi. And of course, you can understand it, because a lot of them were like so abused by the British genocidalists that they were like, well, maybe Hitler is better. Maybe he's going to actually give us freedom, So I get it. Same thing for a lot of the Muslim world too. They were confused, and they didn't really get around to actually feeling what that would look like, a world under the Nazis. However, there were elites, and there are elites who did have a different vision. All that to say, Indira Gandhi clamped down on this terrorist cult center in Khalistan, or not the place that was going to be in what's called the Golden Temple. A lot of people died. It was a brutal fight, brutal clampdown. But it was a serious gunfight at the OK Corral, and Indira was successful at reining it in, but at the same time, she ended up getting assassinated by two closet Khalistani terrorists who got into her security detail and shot her, and then they killed her son, who became Prime Minister Rajiv in 1989 by sabotaging his plane, and he was trying to carry on what his mother was doing to rein in these different insurgency groups. Now, in the case of Canada, unfortunately, the British Commonwealth territories, when they offer a group that's being persecuted sanctuary, it's and there are a lot of really good Sikh Canadians. Not saying that it's a one size fits all, but as we saw with the Ukrainians who all got safe haven after World War II in Canada, and just as we've seen the Chinese who got safe haven and sanctuary in Canada, of which there are a ton in Vancouver and Toronto. These are people who, if they stayed in their home countries, they would be in jail because they're part of a CIA Gladio type operation to destabilize their countries. So the British are very good at offering a safe haven. It's this idea. That's also why they called it Londonistan for many, many years. Because London would always say to these various terrorist groups of Egypt and of Sri Lanka and everywhere, so the Tamils and the Tigers, and they would say, "Oh, you know what? We're not going to judge you. We're liberal. We're open. As long as you abide by British rules, you can have your headquarters and office space in London. It's okay." And then they would use these to court. Actually, in 2002, right after 9/11, something like 13 different countries. Mubarak was leading this charge. Gaddafi also co-wrote this letter as a public message of outrage and a demand to London to shut down all of the terrorist headquarters that were guiding all of these disruptive operations. I'll send you the letter. It's super interesting.
Please do. That's fascinating. Yeah. Well,
so I think with Canada, that's part of it. It's just that India they're not playing ball. They were kind of playing ball. People thought 2 years ago, Modi was kind of like keeping his foot in both pots, and he was acting like, "Oh yeah, we're interested in becoming part of NATO. Sure, let's hear more about that. Let's have a meeting next month." And he kept on playing the evasive game, or yeah, we're interested in becoming part of the Five Eyes. India was going to become part of the whatever Nine Eyes or something, but he kept on evading it. And now they've come to realize that no, he was just biding time to solidify India, and prepare for an actual defense of India from these psychopaths.
Well, I to wrap up the Canada thing. I think I see it as two different things happening. One, I don't discount the fact that 6 weeks ago, Modi, for the first time ever, went to Kiev right after he met with Putin, right after him and Putin had that bromance situation where Modi came to Russia and Putin kind of like wined and dined him and drove him around in the golf cart. And they had kind of a similar experience that Putin had with Kim Jong-un. And then Modi immediately goes to Kiev. And I speculated at the time that, if anyone's going to kind of throw their arm around Zelensky and be like, "Look, man, it's time to have a come to Jesus conversation. These people are going to kill you and they're going to blame it on Putin. And you're going to become a martyr and you're going to become the reason that, this thing escalates. We need to get you out of here." I kind of speculated that might have been what was going on there. I think there's even stronger indication now that whatever conversation they had, whatever was discussed, the CIA was not happy about it. And that's why this is happening. Also, right now, what's happening is you have the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which you've talked about many, many times. They're meeting right now in Islamabad in Pakistan. There's like a major meeting happening right now. 3 hours ago, it was just reported that there's Russia and China are announcing new cooperative, even greater bilateral cooperation agreements than they already had. They're becoming even more bros than they already were before. And what was announced, a day or two ago was that India and Pakistan were potentially going to meet and going to start having bilateral discussions, which would have been a very big deal. This was discussed, mentioned a few weeks ago, and now they're saying, "Oh no, we're not going to do that. We're actually not going to meet at this thing." So I'm kind of hoping to see that change. I'm kind of hoping to see that maybe we're going to see India and Pakistan meet face to face and have a conversation, which would be a major development in that region and like a big step towards peace. But I think this narrative is a big disruptor. Like, it's intended to disrupt any like sentiment towards like peace, like relations between India and Pakistan. So the way I'm seeing all this play out is that the hegemony is recognizing that Donald Trump is coming back into power. They're going to do everything they can to stop him. I'm not saying it's going to be that Trump is going to waltz back into the White House. I'm sure there's going to be all kinds of curveballs, but they're trying to disrupt that by basically starting fires all over the world, including in Taiwan, which you just talked about. They sent the USS Abraham Lincoln carrier battle group to Taiwan. Xi is responding with a show of force and being like, do not even think about doing anything in Taiwan. They're going to Korea. They're going to Iran. They're doing the India, Pakistan thing, Ukraine, obviously. And then ultimately you have this new narrative out about Trump where they're saying that Iran is there's a hit list. It's not just Trump now, it's Trump's people. There's a hit list in the Trump administration of Trump people in Trump's orbit that Iran wants to assassinate. And I think all that's bullshit, by the way. Trump for many months now has said ever since I became a candidate, like an official candidate for president, they are offering me, the intelligence community is offering me intelligence briefings, and I've denied every single one. I don't want your intelligence briefings because you're going to feed me a bunch of bullshit. And I think they're trying to foment a war between Trump and Iran. They want Trump to have animosity towards Iran. They want him to think that Iran's trying to kill him. I think he's too smart for that, obviously. But they're like, maybe we can still get our war with Iran even if Trump gets into office. I think that's what they want.
Yeah, I think so too. I think I'm very happy that you just said that he was denying, he was rejecting their offers for intelligence briefings. That's
not
smart.
Not one. Yep.
Good. Frankly,
Yeah.
no, I tend to agree with you on that as well. I think that they're desperate to do a little sleight of hand and try to reframe all of the evidence for infiltration of foreign agents into America away from the actual black nobility and Satanists that have actually infiltrated and killed all of the American presidents that ever stood up and fought against this thing. They're trying to deflect that and say, oh yeah, all of that stuff you can account for by assuming it's all being driven by Iran. Or inversely, you got, what's his name? Christopher Steele, who just came out. Actually, I got a little clip here of Steele, and then I know we got to round it out. So we'll just play this little Steele thing quickly.
Mm-hmm. I think we're yet to see.
Just say this is Steele giving an interview to a British press about his understanding. He is obviously the Russian expert who's behind a lot of American intelligence about how Putin took control of America through the figure of Trump. But he's giving this interview, which is quite something.
I think we're yet to see perhaps it all play out in the last few weeks before the election. The Russians are also concerned that Kamala Harris will win.
Obviously, very, very close election in America. What are your sources telling you about how Russia might be intervening already or might be planning to intervene?
The one thing that Russia has identified as a key issue in the American election is inflation. And this is something that the Russians think that they can keep up, that they can exacerbate in the West and particularly in America through the oil price. And they've spent the last few years growing closer to OPEC and OPEC leaders to limit production and keep inflation high in the world economy.
And they're also, in your belief, your sources are telling you in your book, that they're in some way trying to manipulate migration at the southern border to the US. Just explain what you found out there.
The Russian intelligence presence in Mexico has absolutely mushroomed. There are many, many more agents operating out of Mexico City now than ever were. And looking at the border, particularly some of the things that were said, I think, by the head of MI5 recently, that the Russians are now in the business of hiring organised criminals and others as plausible deniability, and that somehow they will manipulate gangs and so on to stir up more immigration into the southern part of the US. Yes, I think we're yet to see.
I just had to play that because this is the guy who is directly working for Sir Richard Dearlove, the head of MI6, the guy who created the phony dossier that got us into the bombing campaign against Saddam Hussein in Iraq. It was all based on lies, fake intelligence. That's the guy who's directly under Dearlove, who created the Russiagate dossier, working with the Rhodes Scholars, Strobe Talbot, other things.
Literally called the Steele dossier. It's literally called the Steele dossier.
It's based on his name. All made up. Trump being peed on by prostitutes, all this stuff. This guy was always on the payroll, both of the DNC, but also directed by MI5, MI6, both, as far as I could see it. And he was the former, in the 90s, he was the head of MI6's Russian bureau in Moscow. So this guy is like tied into Bill Browder, you name it. And he's coming out saying the same thing, which ironically is literally, you could remove the word Russia and insert China, and then listen to Brett Weinstein's presentations on Tucker Carlson.
Mm-hmm.
Everywhere he's got a chance to talk about China weaponizing immigration to destroy America, Brett Weinstein was deployed to do that. And it's the same speech, except Brett he's got the trust of the people who don't believe in the Great Reset and who don't like, fascist World Economic Forum freaks. So he's got a different assignment to just set the language, the tone, to accommodate the conservative mindset. And in both cases, it's the same lines exactly. And in both cases, in the case of Brett especially, he's avoiding the fact, my wife Cynthia, she just produced an incredible paper on this. He's avoiding the fact that the Kalergi plan for weaponized immigration, what is it called? The Great Replacement.
Mm-hmm.
So the Great Replacement was actually, the architect of it for the UN was Eric Weinstein. He was the guy personally assigned and commissioned, paid money by the UN to generate the model for the Great Replacement program. And my wife, Cynthia Chung, on her website has a deep dive on Eric Weinstein's role with the UN. He had his own business, his own account around his idea of how to open up borders to lower prices for businesses to pay for immigrants instead of citizens. So the two key figures behind the dark web, or the dark intellectual web, whatever you want to call it, you got Jordan Peterson, you got a few others, are directly tied into the Kalergi plan to undermine nations, and both of them are directly tied to what's known as maybe we'll talk about this in an upcoming show. There's a Luciferian program called Game B that came out of the Esalen Institute to create a response to the controlled breakdown of unbounded neoliberalism that would occur with globalization forecastably. And they wanted to control earlier on the response against the breakdown of the system. And it's called Game B. And Courtney Turner,
controlled opposition dynamic. Controlled
opposition. Yeah. And these guys
control both sides. Yeah. And get people to pick a side. Yeah. And these clowns, by the way, they'll talk about Russia, they'll talk about China, they'll talk about every other place. They'll never talk about AIPAC. They'll never talk about the obvious influence that Israel has over our Congress and over our government. And that's why they have no credibility. That's why I think they're all clowns. If you're not willing to talk about that, like while you're talking about maybe other countries having influence, because I realize that our politicians are all prostitutes and they literally will do anything for anybody for money. If you're not willing to talk about Israel controlling our government, then you are a clown, and I can't take you seriously as an analyst. So
yeah, exactly.
I do have to jump. Do we have any? I missed the beginning. Do we have any ad reads?
I've got one My Pillow ad, and then we can round it out. How's
okay.
that?
I'm gonna jump. I gotta jump off to go put my kids down for naps. But sorry to do that. Sorry to
no, totally good.
Sorry to be a hot mess today. I'm definitely a hot mess. But Matt, I appreciate it. Everyone, hit the thumbs up. We will be more on top of our game next week. Everyone, enjoy your week.
All right, see you, Gordon. And for everybody listening, after this ad, I'm gonna say something interesting. I'm gonna show a little video. So stay on for the ad, okay? People, don't run off now. Now's not the time. All right, Gordon. Till next week, man. Thank you.
See ya.
If I can find it, I know it's here somewhere. Here it is. My Pillow. Here we go.
A large retail store just canceled a huge order, leaving us with a ton of extra My Pillows. But you know what? That's their loss. I'm going to make it your gain. For the first time ever, you get standard classic My Pillows for wholesale prices, only $14.88. I can't believe I'm even saying that. Only $14.88. But it gets even better. For a limited time, I'm going to offer my entire classic collection at wholesale prices. Upgrade to a queen size My Pillow for just $18.88. King size, only $1 more. Get my body pillows for $29.88 and multi-use My Pillows for only $9.88. So go to mypillow.com or call the number on the screen. Use your promo code to take advantage of wholesale pricing for the first time ever on TV, including my standard size My Pillow, only $14.88. They've never been offered this low before. We have limited quantities at this price, so limit's going to be 10, and once they're gone, they're gone.
Okay. All right. So, as I promised, we're talking about distractions to be aware of. Iran is a distraction, Russia, distraction, China, be afraid of China, be afraid of Iran, be afraid of Russia, all of these things. But there's one distraction I didn't bring up, and that's something that I've been following. For some people, they might know that my wife and I have been producing documentaries. We got a series on the hidden hand behind UFOs. The episode 3 of this ongoing series was just dropped last week. It's on CanadianPatriot.org. If people want to watch the full film, we made it freely available, going through the military-industrial complex, the murder of JFK, and the growth of this new UFO religion that a bunch of Satanists have been working on for a very long time. I would say really over 120 years even, to try to redefine what Jesus is, what Muhammad is, what all of the different religious groups of the world. They've been working in catering their messaging to different parts of the world consistently for over a century, to prepare people's minds to assume that what they thought was Jesus or Muhammad or whatever is actually an alien, and aliens have been here the whole time, and aliens have been overseeing our growth and have been interfacing with the elites. So more recently, there's been messaging that I found interesting, little subtle nudges, what's called predictive programming. It's obviously all over our movies, our shows for years and years, which is, as far as I could see it, Netflix, Hollywood. It's entirely run by the CIA. Don't think that anything that's influential coming out of that entertainment industry is not completely run to brainwash you and to get certain assumptions embedded under your, what would you call it? The sentinels of reason, I guess we could say. So there's messaging, there's assumptions that they're infusing. Now, one thing that they've said yesterday, I saw on the Wall Street Journal, mystery drones swarmed by a U.S. military base for 17 days. The Pentagon is stumped, where they quote from Mark Kelly, the former Air Force general, describing how strange it is that there were these craft 7 or 10 meters in length, very big. They call them drones, but they're like, they're not showing up on radar. We can't seem to catch them or do anything about it. All we can do is stand gaping with our mouths wide open, staring at these things at the same time every night. It's obviously, it's catering to assumptions that they're trying to infuse, that these are obviously aliens. They're here now. We're getting close to the promised disclosure time. Yay. So either be happy about the aliens, be afraid of the aliens, whatever. But again, redirect your focus. Don't look at the MI6 operatives, the different Masonic outfits that have been taking over control of your society for centuries, killing your leaders, your people, creating wars, revolutions. Don't look at any of that. Now it's going to be aliens. So again, the new video that we just put out, I'm doing this partially to nudge people into watching and sharing our Hidden Hand Behind UFOs episode 3 on MK Ultra, the creation of the counterculture, the CIA, is what we're going to go through, and especially Carl Jung, who plays a starring role in this in our new film with Alan Dulles, a fellow OSS operative of Carl Jung, who again has a much more powerful role in shaping our zeitgeist than people might realize. So with that, I will end with a little video from Dave Chappelle, and then we'll round it off for today. So without further ado, Dave Chappelle.
Bibble is a space creature that lives very far away in a galaxy called Nebulon 5. And he is solely responsible for the wave of technology we've seen over the last few decades. Cell phones, pagers, PlayStation 1 and 2. You might think it was the Japanese who were responsible, but anyone in the know knows that it was Bibble for shizzle and all about Bibble, because only Bibble can keep it so rude. Hey, Bibble, is the spaceship ready?
Now,
We're ready to get out of here. Okay, me and Bibble are about to leave, but before we go, I just want to say there's no hope for the planet Earth. There's no way to stop the asteroid, and you're all gonna die. Everyone except for me. And of course, Bibble, who's been so kind to let me accompany him on his spaceship. And I'm bringing those 3 clone white women with me. Goodbye, America. I hope you all die in a fiery death when the meteor hits next Tuesday. Come on, Bibble, let's get out of here.
I'm sorry, I couldn't help it. It's just hilarious. But honestly, yeah, they are trying to. They're going to be pushing on this heavy. So people do need to be really, really informed about the nature and structure of these historical battles, because the psyop is going to get loud, all-encompassing. We haven't even started seeing a heavy use of Project Bluebeam yet. We know that holographic technology has been developed for this purpose of projecting all sorts of things. The Messiah in the skies of Brazil was one holographic image projected a few years ago, just as an experiment to see how the Catholic Brazilians would react to seeing a projection of Jesus. There's little tests, but there's going to be a full-on assault onto our minds and our perceptions going forward, organized by these same outfits that brought us MK Ultra, the battlefield of the mind, the war on the mind of the people. That's where the drugs came from. You can't understand where LSD and psilocybin and DMTs and why it's being medicated now by prescription, and as well as why it's just part of our society, if you don't look at the CIA, MI6, and the military industrial complex that have also been behind taking over control of this other thing. So be aware, be firm. It's not Russia, it's not China, it's not Iran, it's not aliens. It is what it is, and you can know what it is, but you got to be firm. So with that, I will end today's stream. Thank you all for joining us, and we'll see you next week.